Good morning, Room 16, and welcome to Lesson 2 of our Gold Rush Informational Reading Unit. Yesterday, we launched our research project officially, and we spent our first day generating a list of subtopics that appear frequently. So that means creating a list of subtopics, and we did that by looking through all of our resources and skimming and scanning, looking for big ideas through phrases that kept repeating, chapters, titles that kept repeating and over again. And I asked you to document some of those subtopics on a Padlet. So we got some responses. Thank you so much to Nate and Varshis, Satvik, Boa, Isha, and Sebastian. Thank you guys so much for participating. When I look at this, I'm seeing so many different subtopics, but I'm also missing a lot. You know what I'm missing? A lot of you guys. Most of the class isn't on here. And just like we've been talking about over the last few days, we are not getting enough work in. We are not on vacation. I know that you're at home, but it is an expectation that you are still participating and learning every day, just like it's an expectation that I'm teaching you every day. So we are going to be doing another Padlet today, and I want to make sure that we get almost every student's name on here for our upcoming Padlet. But with that said, thank you to the people that participated. You are what's pushing us forward and helping us come up with subtopics. So I circled some of the ones that kept repeating, like transportation and people of the gold rush and tools. And I created this document, subtopics of the California Gold Rush. So we can add to this, but so far we have people of the gold rush, mining process, discovery of gold, transportation and routes to the gold fields, California statehood, which is California turning into a state, daily life of miners, and gold fever. So today I want to teach you that when you're researching and looking for subtopics, it's really important that you have a just right book. Oftentimes, nonfiction books can be tricky because they can have a lot of vocabulary in them that makes it hard to understand. And so when you're reading a passage that you're interested in and it's very confusing, I urge you to try to find a much more simplistic text or book to try to understand it so that you can pull out the subtopics. So basically, you're finding a simple book to build your background knowledge so that you can attack those harder books. So I want you to watch me do this. I was reading Life During the Gold Rush, and I got sucked into this section about the impacts on Native Americans because that's been something we've been talking a lot about through all of our units this year. And I'm going to show you that section now. I'm going to go ahead and read it out loud to you, and then I'm going to give you 10 seconds, and I want you to imagine that you're talking to your partner and telling them the big ideas of what I read to you. So listen carefully as I read it, and then I'm going to give you some time to imagine that you're turning and talking. Impact on Native Americans. Not everyone who lived in California during the gold rush hoped to seek riches. Many groups faced challenges and discrimination, but none fared worse than the Native Americans in the area. Native Americans had been living in California for thousands of years before the first miner ever arrived. As more miners began arriving, they built mining camps on Native American land. The Native Americans, I'm over here now, resisted losing their land. A violent cycle of conflicts began between the Native Americans and the miners. The miners usually won. Skirmishes between the two groups continued throughout the 1850s. The Native American population declined quickly before the gold rush. The Native American population was more than 150,000. Within 20 years, it had been greatly reduced. By 1858, there were only approximately 30,000 Native Americans still left in California. So I'm going to pause right there and imagine turning and talking. What were the big ideas of this text? If you're like me, I looked back at the facts there at the end, but I found it difficult to summarize all of that. And that's exactly what I experienced yesterday. And so what I did was found a text that was much more simplistic. I started skimming and scanning, looking for sections on the impacts of Native Americans. And in this book, Pioneer Trails, I found a section that was just a paragraph long using very simple language, and it really helped me build some background knowledge. So listen as I read this section. The American Indians were helpful until the immigrants and government began to change their way of life. Land was taken from the Indians when gold or silver was found there. The government forced the Indians to live on reservations. Sometimes even that land was taken from them if something valuable was found on it. So when I read this, I started to have a really strong understanding that the land that Native Americans had lived on was being taken from them because of the discovery of gold. Able to go back to this much harder text and reread it again and have a deeper understanding. So recognizing that many groups faced challenge and discrimination, but none fared worse than the Native Americans. Now I know it's because they lost their homes. And as I turned the page, this particular section was very difficult for me to understand. I kind of read it and just skimmed through it. But I'm now recognizing that a violent cycle of conflicts began between the Native Americans and the miners. And the miners usually won. And so as I'm thinking back to that simpler text, I'm now realizing that as the Native Americans were being pushed off their land because the miners wanted the gold, the Native Americans were fighting for themselves and fighting for their land. And that's why you have this cycle of conflicts. The miners wanted land, and Native Americans were defending their land. And it said that the miners usually won. So, as you are reading and researching, it's really important that you look to those simpler texts in nonfiction to build your background knowledge. Don't set them aside in this case because you feel like they're too easy for you. They are the perfect text as you're starting to research a topic to build your background knowledge, and then you can layer on more difficult texts and learn more vocabulary to help you speak like an expert on that topic. So, as we do reading today, we are going to continue to generate a list of subtopics that appear frequently. As you're reading, be looking to build your background knowledge with those most basic texts. And once you've read those, move to some of the more complicated texts with stronger vocabulary. So, as you're reading, now that you all have your reading notebooks because you came and picked them up yesterday, I encourage you to set up your reading notebook page like this: people, places, events, and problems. So, you're going to just make a simple X like this, and as you read and research, you're going to be paying attention to different types of people, places that were important in the gold rush, events, and problems. And these are also subtopics that are important when you're researching. So, for instance, Boa found James Marshall in her research yesterday. In the reading that I shared with you, it talked about Sutter's Mill and the discovery of gold in 1848. And then in today's reading, we talked about the impacts on Native Americans. So, just like yesterday, after you've done your 45 minutes of reading, now at least 30 of those minutes should be on Gold Rush. We do encourage you to break the reading up. And so, if you're in the middle of like James and the Giant Peach, a few of you mentioned yesterday, and you're reading that in the evenings, feel free to set aside 20 minutes of your time for that in the evenings, or if you want to go past 45 minutes. But 30 of your minutes should really be dedicated to Gold Rush reading. We're going to go to a new Padlet. So I'm going to open that up now. And this new Padlet has been broken up in the exact same way that your notes that you should be taking while you're reading are broken up. So we have people, events, places, and problems. So I just want you to see how I'm going to add this on. So for people, Boa found James Marshall. And then in events, Mrs. Simpson yesterday read to you that the discovery of gold happened in 1848. places that were important we talked about yesterday is Sutter's Mill. And then today, one of the problems that we learned about was the impacts on Native Americans. So, as you do some research and fill out your grid in your reading notebook, I want you to at the end pop on here and add at least one or two um, subtopics in one of these categories, making sure to include your name. And I do expect that most of our class's name will pop up on here because you are participating. And then once you're done with that, jump into your reading log. The link is on the home page. It's also in your Google Classroom. Jump onto your reading log and jot down any new vocabulary that you found. So for instance, my new vocabulary would be reservation and discrimination. And my reflection might be something along the lines of the Native Americans were discriminated against and their land was taken away from them and they were sent to live on reservations. Their land was seen as valuable because gold was discovered on it. So I synthesized both of the texts that I read and wrote a response. I did not copy from the book. So I hope that you have a very successful day in reading. Your tasks are to add one or two things to this Padlet and fill out a few sentences in your reading log and have a great day of reading. And I look forward to seeing what you're reading and some of your subtopics. Thank you, Room 16.